Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're tackling something pretty important, I think.
Yeah.
But something that's often more hush-hush than headline news. That's right.
Yeah.
We're talking about sex education.
Ooh.
We've got a whole stack of TEDx talks and presentations from experts and educators, and they all have some pretty unique takes on what good sex ed looks like, and more importantly,
Right.
what it shouldn't.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how something that is so universal, so fundamentally human, can be approached in like wildly different ways across the globe.
It really is. By the end of this deep dive, you'll have a much broader perspective on sex ed.
Definitely.
You'll understand the arguments for and against different approaches, and you might even feel equipped to critically examine the messages you received growing up.
Think of it like a global journey,
Ooh, I like that.
exploring how different cultures tackle this, this universal challenge.
Okay, so let's start our journey right here in the U.S.
Okay.
Samantha Bushman's TEDx talk throws down a pretty shocking statistic right out of the gate.
Yeah.
The U.S. has the highest rates of teen pregnancy, unintended pregnancy, abortion, and STIs among all Western industrialized nations.
Wow.
I mean, that's
That's a huge statement.
Yeah, that stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah.
What do you think contributes to these, alarmingly high rates here in the U.S.?
Well, Bushman, she points to several factors, including the prevalence of misinformation and the reluctance to just have these open and honest conversations about sex.
It's like we're afraid to even acknowledge it.
Right. It's like acknowledging sex will magically make teenagers, more likely to do it.
Right.
Don't teach kids about fire because they might start playing with matches.
Right, exactly. But knowledge is power, right?
Exactly.
Avoiding these conversations can actually do more harm than good.
Yeah, for sure. And this brings us to Clint Davis's concept of sexual neglect,
Okay.
which he defines as the lack of age-appropriate and healthy conversations about sex, bodies, and consent.
Okay.
He argues that this type of neglect can lead to some, pretty serious consequences later in life.
What does sexual neglect actually look like?
Oh.
Could you give us some examples?
Sure. It could be a parent avoiding their child's questions about where babies come from, or it could be a school curriculum that focuses just solely on the mechanics of reproduction without even addressing topics like pleasure consent or healthy relationships.
It sounds like it can manifest in many different ways,
Yeah.
both subtle and overt.
Absolutely.
And the consequences can be pretty far-reaching.
Absolutely. Davis actually links sexual neglect to potential issues like addiction, mental health struggles, and unhealthy views of self and others.
Wow.
He also highlights the lack of open conversations around masturbation and menstruation, which are, totally normal parts of human development, but they're often just shrouded in shame and secrecy.
It's so true. Thinking back to my own adolescence, I realized how much I learned about those things from whispered conversations with friends or snippets of information from magazines.
Right.
And who knows how accurate that information was,
Probably not very.
right? It's unfortunate that that's such a common experience.
Right. Yeah, and it really highlights the need for a more proactive and comprehensive approach to sex education.
So if we're doing such a poor job here in the U.S., who's getting it right?
Let's shift gears a little bit and get a global perspective.
Okay.
Dr. Chandramouli, he starts his TEDx talk with this funny anecdote about learning about sex from a classmate, not a parent, not a teacher.
Oh, wow.
And it's relatable and it highlights a common theme. Adults are often just uncomfortable discussing sex and leaving young people to rely on their peers or the media for information.
Which, let's be honest, can lead to a lot of misinformation and potentially harmful messages.
Right.
Right.
So contrast that with Victoria Beltran's TEDx talk, which explores the successes of these pleasure-centric sex education models in Europe. She specifically focuses on the Netherlands and Germany, which have lower rates of STIs and teen pregnancy and higher sexual satisfaction rates.
Wait a minute. That's counterintuitive.
It is.
It seems like we've been operating under some really faulty assumptions about what actually works when it comes to sex education. Can you elaborate a bit on these pleasure-centric models?
Sure. They emphasize not just the mechanics and risks of sex, but also the emotional, social, and pleasurable aspects.
Okay.
They encourage open communication, they teach about consent and healthy relationships, and they even address topics like body image and self-esteem.
So they're approaching sex education from a more holistic perspective,
Yes.
rather than just focusing on the don'ts.
Exactly. And the results really speak for themselves. When young people are equipped with accurate information and are taught to view sex as a positive and healthy part of life, they're more likely to make responsible choices.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've seen this stark contrast between this often fear-based approach here in the U.S. and then these more holistic, pleasure-centric models in Europe.
Right.
But how does this play out in terms of specific issues like inclusivity?
That's a great question, and Vivica Lewis's TEDx talk provides some really valuable insights.
Okay.
She shares her experience in a French sex ed classroom, which stands in stark contrast to what we typically see here in the U.S. French sex education is really comprehensive, covering topics like healthy relationships, gender identity, and consent in ways that are often absent from U.S. curriculums.
It's amazing how a different cultural lens can reveal the shortcomings of our own approach.
Yeah.
Can you give us some specific examples of what this inclusive sex ed looks like in practice?
Sure. Lewis mentions the use of the gender unicorn, which is a visual tool for discussing gender identity and expression.
Interesting.
And it's a simple but effective way to introduce the idea that gender is more than just male and female, and that there's a whole spectrum of identities and expressions out there.
So instead of just talking about the birds and the bees, they're acknowledging the full spectrum of human sexuality.
Exactly.
Right.
And this inclusive approach, it's not about just being politically correct or whatever. It's about equipping young people with the knowledge and skills they need to navigate a complex world.
They're going to meet people from all walks of life.
Exactly.
It makes you wonder, why are we so hesitant to have these open and honest conversations?
Yeah.
It's like we're doing young people a disservice by not equipping them with the tools they need to navigate their own identities and relationships.
Yeah, it's a complex issue for sure, rooted in, cultural norms and societal expectations and even our own discomfort with these topics.
Yeah.
But as we've seen from these examples in Europe, a more open and inclusive approach can actually lead to, better outcomes for young people.
So true.
Yeah.
And speaking of harmful myths, let's turn to Veronica Whitehead's talk.
Okay.
Which tackles this persistent belief that first-time sex must be painful for women.
Right.
What I thought was so striking is that this belief persisted even among her well-informed students who had learned about the physiology of sex and, the role of lubrication.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how these deeply ingrained societal narratives can override even scientific knowledge.
Yeah.
It highlights this importance of not just providing accurate information, but also challenging those underlying assumptions and beliefs that can perpetuate harmful myths.
Think back to your own adolescence. What were the prevailing narratives about sex?
Oh, wow.
Where did you get your information?
Yeah.
Were you taught about pleasure, or was the focus solely on the risks and dangers?
Yeah, it's a powerful exercise in self-reflection.
It really is. And it brings us to another crucial aspect of sex education, understanding how the adolescent brain develops.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, let's dive into the brain science.
Great.
The TED Ed video on the adolescent brain explains how hormones like estrogen and testosterone influence the development of the limbic system and the nucleus accumbens.
Right.
These areas are responsible for processing emotions, rewards, and social connections.
That's why it's so intense.
Which is why those things feel so intense during adolescence.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just hormones, though.
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex, which governs impulse control and rational decision-making, is still developing during this time.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's like giving someone a Ferrari with a learner's permit.
I love that analogy.
They have the potential for incredible speed and power, but they need guidance and support to handle it responsibly.
It really helps to explain why teenagers sometimes make decisions that seem impulsive or risky.
Yeah.
It's not that they're incapable of thinking things through, it's just that their brains are still under construction.
Exactly. And this has really important implications for how we approach sex education.
Okay, how so?
Instead of just lecturing teenagers about the dangers of sex, we need to engage them in conversations that acknowledge their curiosity, address their concerns, and equip them with the skills they need to make informed choices.
So it's about empowering them, not just scaring them.
Precisely. And it's about understanding that they're going through this period of intense physical, emotional, and social development.
Right.
We need to be patient and provide them with accurate information and create a safe space for them to ask questions and explore their own identities.
This all makes so much sense, but it also feels pretty daunting. Where do we even start? How do we shift from this culture of silence and shame to one of openness and empowerment?
Samantha Bushman had a great point in her talk.
Okay.
She reminded us that even if we feel unprepared or awkward, we all have the capacity to talk to young people about sex and relationships.
Yeah.
Just showing up, being present, creating a space for open dialogue can be incredibly powerful.
It's about being that trusted adult, that person they feel safe confiding and asking questions, even sharing their struggles.
Exactly. And it's not just about what we say, it's about how we listen.
Yeah.
Validating their feelings, not judging their choices, creating a space where they feel heard and respected.
Makes me think about Veronica Whitehead's talk and how important it is to challenge those deep-seated societal narratives that perpetuate shame and misinformation.
Yeah, for sure. And if we want to see real change, we need to move beyond those narrow, fear-based frameworks and embrace a more inclusive, sex-positive approach.
Okay.
An approach that acknowledges the full spectrum of human experiences, desires, and identities.
It all comes back to that question Veronica Whitehead posed. If sex is a fundamental human experience, why are we so reluctant to talk about it openly and honestly?
It's a question that challenges us to examine our own beliefs, biases, and messages we've internalized. It's a question that, quite frankly, we need to be asking ourselves, our communities, and our leaders.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the complexities of sex education, both the challenges and the incredible potential.
Yeah.
It feels like we're at a turning point, a moment where we can choose to either perpetuate the cycle of silence and shame or break free and create something truly transformative.
I agree. And that's what makes this conversation so crucial. We're not just talking about sex, we're talking about well-being, about empowerment, about equipping future generations with the knowledge and skills they need to lead healthy, fulfilling lives.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that this isn't just about fixing sex education. It's about shifting our entire culture's approach to sexuality.
Yeah.
It's about creating a world where young people feel empowered to make informed choices, have healthy relationships, and experience their sexuality with joy and confidence.
It's a vision worth striving for, and it starts with each one of us. Every conversation we have, every myth we debunk, every action we take can contribute to a brighter future.
So much of what we've talked about today circles back to that idea of sexual neglect. It seems like the more we try to avoid these conversations, the more harm we might be doing.
It's like anything else we care about.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's teaching our kids about finances or nutrition, we wouldn't just avoid the topic altogether because it feels uncomfortable.
Yeah.
We have a responsibility to guide them, give them the tools and knowledge they need to thrive.
But navigating these conversations can feel so overwhelming, especially in a world where misinformation spreads like wildfire online. How can we as individuals make a real difference?
Well, Samantha Bushman had a great point in her talk.
Okay.
She reminded us that even if we feel unprepared or awkward, we all have the capacity to talk to young people about sex and relationships. Just showing up, being present, creating a space for open dialogue can be incredibly powerful.
It's about being that trusted adult, that person they feel safe, confiding and asking questions, even sharing their struggles.
Exactly. And it's not just about what we say, it's about how we listen. Validating their feelings, not judging their choices, and creating a space where they feel heard and respected.
That makes me think about Veronica Whitehead's talk and how important it is to challenge those deep-seated societal narratives that perpetuate shame and misinformation.
Yeah, for sure. And if we want to see real change, we need to move beyond those narrow, fear-based frameworks and embrace a more inclusive, sex-positive approach.
Yeah.
An approach that acknowledges the full spectrum of human experiences, desires, and identities.
It all comes back to that question Veronica Whitehead posed. If sex is a fundamental human experience, why are we so reluctant to talk about it openly and honestly?
It's a question that challenges us to examine our own beliefs, biases, and the messages we've internalized. And it's a question that, quite frankly, we need to be asking ourselves, our communities, and our leaders.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the complexities of sex education, both the challenges and the incredible potential.
Yeah, me too.
It feels like we're at a turning point, a moment where we can choose to either perpetuate the cycle of silence and shame or break free and create something truly transformative.
I agree, and that's what makes this conversation so crucial. We're not just talking about sex, we're talking about well-being, about empowerment, about equipping future generations with the knowledge and skills they need to lead healthy, fulfilling lives.
I think the biggest takeaway for me is that this isn't just about fixing sex education. It's about shifting our entire culture's approach to sexuality. It's about creating a world where young people feel empowered to make informed choices, have healthy relationships, and experience their sexuality with joy and confidence.
It's a vision worth striving for, and it starts with each one of us. Every conversation we have, every myth we debunk, every action we take can contribute to a brighter future.
Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it sparks some reflection, some conversation, and maybe even some inspiration to make a difference.
Remember, change is possible, and it starts with us.